Yo, what's up YouTube? Razor back with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about a preparation guide I have for Kazuha. And if you guys don't know what a preparation guide is, basically I'm just me talking about my thoughts on a character prior to the release, along with some such as what weapons I would recommend on them, what talents I recommend leveling in what order, how his kit works, how he works with other characters, as well as talking about his stats and just general thoughts. And so this is kind of like going to be a lot of information. In particular, it's going to be covering stats, talents, weapons, artifacts, constellations, teammates, and then finally some summary on the character. And I know it sounds like a lot of information, and it will be. The video will probably be like 30 minutes long. If you want to stick to a particular point in the video, please feel free to use timestamps. I will try to keep things as independent from each other sections as possible. However, due to how the game works, stuff will eventually inevitably intertwine. Please feel free to cross-reference other sections as necessary. But I would recommend you guys watch it from beginning to end. And also, before I started this video, I have made a little bit of quality of life changes. One, I do have a face cam now, so you guys can see my lovely face. And I do have my Twitch chat, so feel free to check out my Twitch. Will be linked below in the description. Twitch.tv/RazorNinjas. I do stream. I try to stream regularly. I'm not sure how my schedule will work with how my internship will be once I start on Monday, the 17th. That may also change the YouTube videos, but we'll see how things go. Without further ado, let's get on to the video. Kazuha, I'm just gonna stay it right here, right now. Kazuha is kind of interesting as a character, to be honest, like how he fits. In my opinion, he's going to be a sub DPS character, and he's somewhat like a mixture of like Venti, Jean, Sucrose, those three, the good Anemo characters. And you know, the Traveler, nobody forget about him. He's not relevant anymore. No one actually cared about the Anemo Traveler, unless you're like Enviosity, who uses only like the free-to-play characters, right? So I'll go further deep of why I believe so. He's basically a sub DPS that has a lot of utility, but at the same time is capable of outputting a lot of good DPS. And this will become very apparent, especially if you have C1, but I'll further talk that later as we talk about the talents in particular. This will be important. Let's first start off with the stats. So, for the stats for Kazuha, generally I think the stats look kind of mediocre. They're about average. His attack is nothing to be like majorly broken. He ain't no Shao. He's no Eula. He's no Diluc. He's not meant to be like a main damage dealer really, unless you have Constellation 6. Well, and we'll talk about that. But his defensive stats, his HP and defense seem to be fairly high. You know, it's just general in the mill. He's a melee character. He's more likely to get hit than say a bow character. So may as well give him more defenses, right, to compensate for that. High base HP. I think he actually has relatively higher base HP. Could matter if you're running a Jade Cutter potentially on him, which is a really good weapon still. For almost any sword character, will be pretty alright on Kazuha himself. And the main thing that I want to take note in this section really is that his Ascension stat, which is the stat that is increased from the non-C2, C4, is the Elemental Mastery. And currently only a very few characters have this. Specifically, Fischl and Shanling are the only two characters. Lisa and Shanling are the two characters that have the Elemental Mastery. So he'll be the third character. And this will come into contact later when we talk about his passive and his Elemental Burst. And also keep in mind, yes, people talk shit about Swirl a lot, but at the same time, Swirl's also getting its base damage buffed with 1.6, plus the scaling on the Elemental Mastery for Swirl will be a lot better. So much so, it's like almost double the amount it is right now. So this Swirl could be dealing quite a good amount of damage, and it would be pretty easy to spam. And people also shit talk Swirl a lot, but it has very good utilities because a lot of the times it turns out is that really the way they put the Abyss characters is that characters tend to break other characters. So what I mean by that is like, especially on the Fatui guys, like they put like the Cryo guy right next to the Electro guy, which makes it a lot easier. If you get them together, triggering Swirl, break their shield, break the Electro guy's shield. Very easy from the Cryo. It's actually quite useful as utility, especially when it comes to breaking corresponding shields of the Abyss mages. So, you know, there is a lot of benefit to Swirl. People don't really talk about this. And then finally, the crit rate, crit damage is pretty much the same as every other character, besides those that ascend on crit rate or crit damage, which there are fairly few. So, for the Ascension mats, we have the gemstones. If you've gotten one character up, you've pretty much gotten all of them up. There's just the same 6 gemstones, 9 chunks, 9 fragments, and 1 sliver. Pretty much run-of-the-mill for any character in the game. And he will require a new boss material, a 40 boss material, a resin, and it will be from this Magyu Kenki boss. It's like a samurai dude. I believe he does drop the Anemo gems. I'm not entirely sure. Someone will correct me in the comments. But it doesn't really matter too much on the gemstones, to be honest, because you can always just use the Dust of Azoth, or Azoth to convert colors, so it doesn't really matter what you get at the end of the day. And his local specialty will be from the new area released with 1.6. So you can just feel free to use the Genshin map to go farm this. I'm not sure if this, if Yanfei, Chi-Chi's, or Klee's pastels will work here. Probably not. So you'll probably have to farm this. Just use the Genshin map and just look around, I guess. And then feel free to plunder your friends' worlds for these because, you know, they won't know if you take it behind their back, right? And for the enemy material, he will require the treasure hoarder insignias. Pretty easy to farm. Just use your book. If you're diligent with this and you farm at your friends' worlds as necessary, if you're behind, should not be too difficult. And then finally, we have Mora. Mora, actually, funny enough, be one of the harder ones to do because Mora sucks to grind in this game, but is definitely worth to max ascend the character. You don't need to get him at 90. He's not one of those characters you need to get to 90 unless you want some more defenses on him. It's not necessary, but just from a pure offensive standpoint, right? As a sub DPS, it's not too necessary. So, and that's going to be the stats. Now let's move on to talking about the talents for the character. So, Kazuha is a very unique kit, and honestly, it's sometimes a little bit harder to break him down, and I'm going to do my best. So I may not be 100% on this, and I apologize, but let me start from the top. So his auto attack, one of the things I want to highlight first is that he's the first sword character in the game that can have a 3-hit on one of their 5-hit combos. So, you know, Ayaka may have been first in beta, but she's not out yet in full game, so she's getting pulled off to the side, you know. Mihoyo's like sleeving her for later or whatever, but this honestly won't matter too much unless you have C6. So, you know, it's cool, but unless you have C6, which like 99% of people won't get, it's not going to matter. But what I do want to highlight for Kazuha's normal attack in particular is this part, the plunging attack Rannan Haishi. And what this does, and we'll talk about this more as I talk about the skill Chihaya Furu, but when you do a plunge while in the elemental skill, you'll be in the air after it, kind of like Venti's hold E, pulled skill. You'll plunge down, and this will do Anemo damage. It'll basically infuse the plunge attack with Anemo and create a miniature wind tunnel. So basically, this is kind of like the Vertisan Hunt weapon, if you have that before. It sucks a lot of the smaller enemies up. So if you have a bunch of treasure hoarders, it will suck those guys up. Hilichurls. I don't think it works on the Minotaurs or the big boy, the big Fatui guys, but it's still very, very good at getting those guys sucked, and it sucks them on the ground in particular. So unlike Sucrose, which bounces them around like a bouncy ball, or Venti, which kind of like which can suck them in the air, Kazuha is capable of putting them on the ground, which really makes a lot of the melee characters a lot more relevant, right? So characters like Eula can hit all the enemies at once with their E ability, and it can do a lot of damage. You have potentially a Lisa, you can suck everyone up and put Lisa in, they all get hit, they all die. Diluc, you can do your elemental skills and hit all of them at once. There's a lot of really good potential from this ability, and I actually like it. And the plunge attack, generally are okay, but then keep in mind that this will scale with, instead of physical, this is dealing Anemo, so this will deal a lot more damage on top of that. And but now let's move on to the meat and potatoes, the Chihaya Furu. And basically, this is kind of like Venti's hold E, except there's a chest and hold, and both of them do pretty much the same thing as Venti's hold E. The hold will have a bigger AoE radius, and so basically can get hit a lot more enemies than the press, and does more damage, and has a longer cooldown. So just kind of like generic hold. But what this does is it launches Kazuha in the air, kind of like Venti hold if you've never seen it before. And when he ends in the air, he can do a plunge attack called the Rannan Haishi, which will then do this exactly the same. It will do Anemo damage and then create a vortex that sucks enemies in. And so what you can do, though, a very fun thing you could do with this ability, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit right now, the C1, if you have it, when you use the elemental burst, it'll reset the cooldown of the elemental skill, and it decreases the cooldown by 10%. This is actually nuts, especially if you top it on top with the Anemo resonance, which may reduce this by another 10%. Like, what you can do is that he can do a hold version of the skill level 9. So you do 443, you go up, do your plunge attack at, let's just say, level 9, do 300% on that if you do a low. And so that's at minimum, this could do like 700% damage. And then you can use your Elemental Burst, which will do another 400% at level 9. And then potentially 600, 400 to 600%. And then you can just do it again, right? So you can do hold, and then you can do your press, and then you can do your plunge. And this could do like 2,000 elemental skill damage just straight up right there. It's ridiculous how fast you can time this, especially if you have C1, which is why C1 is going to be absolutely insane for him and one of the best constellations. But it just makes him stand out a lot more. So this is what I want to highlight. He's not a full-on support. Please do not just give him EM like a Sucrose. He is fully capable of dealing some really, really high Animo damage as well. He is fully capable of being a very solid sub-DPS character. People are just like putting him off to the side. I would run him on an EM timepiece, and I'll talk about that in the artifact section, but people are like sleeping on this character, and I just want people to know how much potential he actually has late in game, right? And finally, moving on to his Elemental Burst, we have the Manyo no Ito. And what this does is that it's kind of like Sucrose, except it doesn't have like the CC part in it. Actually, it's basically like Sucrose and Ganyu, more like Ganyu to be honest. It's like Animo Ganyu. So it creates this large field, and it will constantly deal. It'll do one initial hit of strong Animo, and then it will constantly be dealing Animo damage. But on top of that, it can also, like all the other Animo elemental bursts in this game, it can absorb elements, right? Except Shao, I guess. And it will deal elemental damage of that type. And you may think, well, Razor, well, isn't this elemental damage going to be garbage? Well, the thing is that this actually can scale with his own passive. And I will talk about that later on. But this is actually capable of doing some really good damage. And then, especially if you C1, you can just suck enemies in and then keep them in this burst. And it just deals so much damage. He's capable of, he's like truly like somewhat of more DPS focused on Venti, more DPS focused Sucrose, more DPS focused Trout, like sub DPS. Instead of offering a lot of more utility, he's more like on sort of utility to damage spectrum. He's kind of like more focused on the attack, but he's also being capable of being a very solid support character. And this lasts for 8 seconds and has a 60 cost burst, so it's pretty good overall. And then going into talent levels, he will require the diligence books, which you can farm on either Tuesdays, Fridays, or Sundays. Not too major, just feel free to farm that. Plus, you will have the overflow event for the book domain, so if you guys want to farm from early, this would be a good chance for you to do so by the time this video comes out. And then he also requires treasure hoarding insignia, so just keep farming this, I guess. And you will require the scales, I think these are scales, from the Azdaha fight. So if you're lucky, you don't need to use Jolvins, but if you're unlucky and want to get these up, feel free, just use the solvents and just use some other mat you don't need, like the branch or whatever. Or like the crown if you're not rolling for Eula. And in terms of, and speaking of leveling, level priority I would recommend, to be honest, would be the elemental burst, the elemental skill, and then finally the normal attack. So that would be the order. To be honest, like the order is not really as important on him as other characters because all of his abilities are just good. They just scale overall. So just, if I had to choose one, it would be the burst first. And now, finally, when talk about the talents, we got to talk about the passives. So, overall passive decreases stamina consumption by party members by 20% to Matsukaze Karyu. And, like, this is basically Kaya, this is Razor. It's like, nothing too important, right? He's not unique. But the really important part are the combat-oriented passives. And so, the Weathering Blade is a really interesting passive because when I said that the Elemental Burst can deal Elemental type, that's actually not entirely true because the skill can also deal Elemental damage of that type. So, for example, if put out Goba fires his Nasty Breath on someone, Nasty Pepper Breath, they get Pyro. He hits Pyro, he's going to be dealing 200% extra Pyro damage, which is pretty nice. It also counts as a plunge attack. This doesn't really matter too much unless you have stuff that scales with plunging attack. Specifically, when we talk about the weapon, this will be more important. But important aspect, I guess, if you're going to roll for his weapon. And now we move on to the second part, which is actually a really important part of how he works. So, when you trigger a swirl reaction for an element, Kazuha will grant 0.3% elemental damage bonus of the per point of elemental mastery for 8 seconds. Roughly, the math is that like if you have like 1,000 or 800 roughly, it's like 18% increase in damage bonus. It's not like gonna be like insanely good, but it's still really good at 20%. It's like a free set, man. It's a free set of a type, and it's solid. It's a solid damage booster, not only to his teammates as a sub DPS, but also to himself. And so, for example, again, go back to the Shanling example. If he swirls a Pyro from Guoba, Kazuha will grant everyone, I think including himself, a certain amount of pyro damage bonus. And keep in mind that since both his elemental skill and his burst can deal the absorb elemental damage, he can also deal some very good damage of other elements. So this additional element damage from his burst becomes a lot more relevant now, because it's not just doing 0% pyro damage, it's doing like 20% pyro. And you might think that's not a lot, but keep in mind this is hitting over a lot of hits, right? And it's pretty easy to keep this up. You can just keep doing this once every 8 seconds. But the thing is that Kazuha's press has a 6-second cooldown, so you can, if you're diligent with your cooldown times, you can pretty much always keep this up. And if you have run like something like a electro charge build, which has a unique property of doing hydro and electro, you could potentially swirl both of these and get a hydro and electro boost. So if you run like a super like electro charge team with some sort of like child or fish or whatever, he'd be a good character to put on that as well. So he has a lot of potential with a lot of teams, and that's why I really like his character, to be honest. That is going to be the talents, and now we're going to be moving on to the weapon choices I would recommend for Kazuha. So, for this, I did prepare a tier list for us. There's only one 3-star weapon in here for the note, and that's the Dark Iron Sword, and I'll talk about that. You can only buy this weapon like one time. It's very limited, but it is like decent, and that's why I put it on the tier list anyway. Hopefully, if you still have it. But I have included pretty much every other 4-star sword. There is one 4-star sword I have not included on this tier list, and that is in particular the Sword of Dissension, because that is a PS4 exclusive weapon, and who gives a crap? No, like, that 99% of you guys probably don't even play on PlayStation, so it won't even matter. It's not even relevant. So, starting off at D tier, the worst of the worst, the garbage. We have the Prototype Rancor, and we have the Flute. These are just physical weapon on him. He's more Animo focused, not even worth considering, kind of garbage. And the Flute is just a bad weapon. Remember when everyone recommended this weapon at launch? It's so bad. How has it fallen? Because it's just so bad nowadays. But yeah, I would not touch these weapons with a pole, with a 10-foot pole, unless you have literally nothing. But moving on to C tier, we have the Lion's Roar. Problem is very limited in terms of comps, and it's only attack, so it's kind of like meh. Now we have the Rail Sword, Copium as heck weapon, because you'll have to rely on autos to deal with your crits, which is not really what you want to do with Kazuha. You'll have the Favonia's sword. It's not bad, but he already has a cheap enough burst. 60 is not too expensive at the end of the day, so you don't need to overcharge 60 ER on him. Especially when you want him to be dealing damage, because he has a lot of damage potential. Same with, it's kind of similar reasoning with Sack Sword, but the thing with Sack Sword is that his cooldown is like at most 9 seconds, and if you have C1, like 6 to 5 seconds long. It's not even that much of a bonus. It's just kind of, leave this on your Xingqiu. This is way better on him. Dark Iron Sword has some potential. It's an EM mastery weapon, so it will scale with his C6 ability and his second passive for the extra damage bonus, but it's limited. Most people not have it because they probably burned it, and it's just kind of like, it's very limited in comps. It has to go in electro characters, so it's meh. It's not that great, so. But it's in C tier, gotta give it some honorable mention. B tier, we have the all-right weapons. You can run this, just, it's not the best, but it will do its job, fairly do. So Black Cliff, Black Cliff still is just a solid weapon in general. But the Black Cliff on sword in particular, though, doesn't give that much crit damage, so it's a little bit, like, I would not run this weapon, but if you literally have nothing else, it's a good option. The Festering Desire is not a good option. I'd rather leave this on Bennett, to be honest, but because the problem with this is that it will give you the crit rate from the Chihaya Furu, but it will not count as skill damage with the plunge, so this will not scale with your increased crit rate. So also ER is like, it's iffy. Like, it's kind of B. It's arguably a C tier, and screw it, I'm going to put him in C tier. It's not that good. Festering Desire is not that good. Then we have the Alley Flash. Alley Flash, the problem with Alley Flash, it has good base attack, but the EM is ridiculously low, especially if you want to make him more of a sub DPS focus. It's like, it's not that great. It's like 50 EM. It's like, ugh. Put this on like your Bennett or whatever, right? But we have the Skyward Blade. Just general 5-star, high base, decent base attack, decent subs, decent effect, pretty all right. It's just a 5-star. I mean, you can't put 5 stars at C, right? It's all right. At the end of the day, you'll be fine if you run this on him. It's not the best weapon, but it's definitely not the worst either. Summon Shaper, kind of similar thing. The problem with Summon Shaper is they have to be more of an auto-focus for the attack. It's got like, but again, 5-star weapon, you know, can't be lower than B, right? Even on R1, this thing is do pretty all right. And then Aquila Favonia, this is like melee Kazuha build. It's just a meme. It's melee, a physical Kazuha is going to be meme. It's just not that good. Attack bonus, but it's based off refinement. So again, like it's just all right. It's mediocre. It's not copium tier, but it's like, eh. But the real juice, like the real meat potatoes that people, meat potatoes that people want to go into is the S and A tier, right? So A tier, we have the Iron Sting. Iron Sting has actually a really good amount of EM and a very solid effect that is capable of going from Kazuha and is a generally easy to approach option, right? Most people probably have, unless you crafted a bunch of prototype Rancors for some reason, either you have a bunch of billets or you have a bunch of stings. This will be a very useful weapon on him. They can pivot. You may not even be using this weapon right now. So, someone could use this weapon. It's very good utility. He can offer some very good damage potential as sub DPS. Very good option. Black Sword, crit rate, solid, can't go wrong. Like I said, he has a lot of potential to do a lot of burst DPS with his elemental skill and burst and his plunge attack, having very easy to spam. So very solid option on the sword as well, on the Black Sword, just for that alone. And yeah, so moving on to the S tier, the BIS weapons. In my opinion, the Freedom Sworn, which is the new weapon, will scale higher than the Jade Cutter, but Jade Cutter is still really good, which is why it deserves as an S tier rating, especially if you plan to build him as sub DPS. So, Jade Cutter, much everyone knows it, broken crit rate, a very solid attack, especially if you refinement on it. It's just a good weapon, man. Like, it's one of the best weapons in the game. But Freedom Sworn will arguably be better. So if you guys don't know what Freedom Sworn does, let me quickly go back to it real quick. So let me just actually go to this one, go back to the swords, and open up Freedom Sworn. So it is from the Millennial Movement, so this includes the Song of Broken Pines, that will be on Eula's banner, as well as the Elegy for the End that was on Venti's banner. So this is an Elemental Mastery weapon, again, and so it offers the most Elemental Mastery out of all the weapons, and it offers a 608 base attack, and so this will make his supported capabilities a lot better as well. And so you can get more. You can get more damage if you have C6. It'll do you more damage, and if you have you have the second passive, it will also give you more damage bonuses as well, and as well as increase the swirl. Right, the swirl's getting a buff as well, considerable buff. But the main part of this weapon that most people are interested in is the effect. Right, so what it does is increases damage by 10% to 20% depending on refinement. If you have Scoured Pride, it's very similar from 8 to 16 on Pride, I believe. This is 10 to 20, so it does offer a little bit more damage bonus. And here's the thing, like all of the LG series, the Millennium Movement weapons, it does have a sigil part, like the other ones, and this one has to deal with triggering elemental reactions. The reason why this is so good on Kazuha is that Onimo can only trigger reactions. It cannot be part of an aura for another reaction, so you don't have to worry about ordering when it comes to this. You can almost guarantee you'll get this ability off when you need it. So it makes it so easy to do, especially if you have his elemental burst. You have the DOT, and this can be procced even off field. So you can proc. It's very much 100% synergy with Kazuha's elemental burst. You proc this off, you get off, right? And the DOT will also swirl as well. So he'll swirl with himself essentially. So, but it only requires 2. It has a longer cooldown between sigils, but it only requires 2. And when you have all of them, they'll be consumed, and you'll get a buff, the Song of Resistance buff for 12 seconds. And when you get the Song of Resistance, normal charge and plunge attack damage modifiers, not attack, will be increased by 16 to 32% depending on refinement, and increases attack by 20% to 40% depending on refinement. And this is actually going to be a really, really good character, like weapon for supporting other characters like Ayaka later down the line, even Eula. This would be a really good weapon for supporting Eula, not on Eula herself, mind you, but with Kazuha on Eula to make her support a lot better. If you like doing those normal attack focused builds, it just is really good. It's a really good support weapon in that regard. The attack bonus is also pretty freaking solid. Especially if you run on Kazuha, it's pretty easy to proc. I mean, you can also cheese it with Bennett as well if you want, if you'd like. But this is just, I actually think this is highly slept on. Millennial movements, LG is getting a buff, and if you're a whale, running the Exodia comp with multiple R5 LGs is going to be really freaking good for you. You may not even want to focus on attack at that point because you can start focusing on ER and EM and other aspects because you can get these procs to happen so frequently. But it's just a very good weapon, especially on Kazuha. It's just basically made for him, essentially. And it's a really good sub DPS weapon. This will also increase his own if you have C6. If you're a whale and have C6, this will give you more damage. But if you're planning to roll for Ayaka, like I said, Ayaka is very likely to be a normal focused character, so this will work well as well. As well as for Eula, you know, you're dealing a lot of normal attacks with Eula. This will just make your damage do even more, right? So it's just a really good weapon. And yeah, that's going to be the weapons. And now we're going to be moving on to artifacts for Kazuha. So let me just quickly switch over to the artifacts real quick. Open up a new tab. Don't mind me. But there are a lot of options to go down for Kazuha. I'm not going to lie. There's like plenty of different routes you can go around. All of them are pretty much really fine. It's not really, set's not really too much of an issue on him. Probably my recommended sets would be 2-piece Wanderer, 2-piece Venerer if you can't afford it. If you can't afford Wanderer, I know Wanderer can be a heck of annoying to farm. 4-piece Venerer is fine. 2-piece Venerer, 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Venerer, 2-piece Glad, 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Glad. Like, there's a lot of different options. Just any subset of those is fine. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's the damage. I mean, ideally, especially if you don't have C6, just get the Venerer. The 2-piece Venerer, 2-piece X, or 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece X are those extra damage modifier bonuses for him if you want to increase his damage. But it's not too important at the end of the day. It's only 15%, you know. So feel free to go about this how you please. Noblesse could actually be pretty good, though, considering how his DOT also counts towards that burst requirement. So, you know, it's still pretty good. 4-piece Noblesse is not bad either. Like I said, there's a lot of options, but mainly what I want to focus on is the stats. He's pretty much build them kind of similar to almost every DPS, funny enough. For the hat, you'll want to run the crit rate or crit damage depending on how your stats go or your weapon you picked. So most of the time you'll want to run crit rate anyway to maintain like a somewhat 60, 120, 70, 140 ratio on him to get him out some decent damage. And for the cup, obviously run Anemo Cup. Please just run Anemo Cup only. Anemo Cup is really going to make him do a lot more damage as well. Please don't run an EM Cup. It's just not worth it. On the timepiece, here we actually want to run EM on him for the extra EM bonuses. It's also not that much better than the, you know, especially if you have like other attack percent bonuses. Just EM just works a lot better, especially considering his sub DPS role. And then we have the Flower and Feather, which are static. So substats, again, crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge. These are like the holy trinity. Pretty much everyone runs this. EM, attack. These are pretty much the only ones you care about. Like those are the only 5. So I don't want to be like, it's like pretty much how you run on most characters, most good artifacts. So make sure hopefully you have some good EM timepieces. It would be, it's pretty good for you to farm. As well as there's a rumored new system that allows you to trade 5-star artifacts in for Wanderers, Glad, Noblesse, and Bloodstains. So you can actually get, it's easy. It's technically easier to farm Wanderers now, I guess. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, I mean, I don't like artifacts build is like not too complicated for him because he's actually very flexible, and that's what I like about him, right? Now let's just move on to the constellations, the whale section of the video. And I want to preface this section just by saying you don't need constellations on him to be a solid character. I believe he could still work very, very well at C0. However, having the constellations will obviously make his damage output and synergies a lot better, right? It's just, it's a no-brainer. So, all right, time to get my Japanese out. So starting off at C1, we have Zenzan Kohen, which I think this is actually really, really good. It's basically Eula's passive, child C6 ability. It not only will increase the skill cooldown by 10%, but also when you use the burst, it sets the cooldown of the elemental burst, of the elemental skill. Right, and this is, like I said, you can do a very nutty combo. I said this in the elemental skill, but you can do hold skill for like 400, assuming level 9, 443% damage, and then follow it up with a plunge, which can do at level 9, which will do 300 to 375%. So that's already like 700% right there. And then after that, you can do it, now that they're all sucked from the Rannan Haishi, you can follow it up with an elemental burst, which will do potentially 446% damage, plus the 204 DOT from, let's assume one hit hits, that's 646%, and then followed up with another level 300 and 300. You could be doing 700 plus 600 plus 600. It's like around 2,000% elemental skill. Obviously, there's a separated, and these can still crit. It's just nutty how much damage you can combo into himself, and it's actually quite good. And I think people are going to be sleeping on this ability quite a bit. And I think it's arguably his best constellation, funny enough. Not even a C6. This is just good. And very highly slept on. Falling into C2, we have Yamarashi Zanshi. I probably butchered that so badly. But this is also another really good elemental passive they got from a constellation. What it does is, as long as you're in this large as freaking heck elemental burst, like kind of like a Ganyu level field, not only himself, but any character that's inside of his field will gain 200%. So like, it doesn't say active character, by the way. So I believe this may actually even work in co-op too. So as long as you're in the field, all these characters are going to be getting some free elemental mastery. So that's a fun co-op thing. But I think also as well is that this will increase his own elemental mastery. So if Kazuha happens to trigger a swirl while he's not on field, this will also make his swirl damage be a lot better, right? And also if you have C6, also make him do a lot more EM. It's actually quite underrated. It's better than Diona's, because the problem with Diona is that you have to have a certain HP threshold, right? And the field is very small. However, this is just massive. And as you could swirl with if you do like a Melter Vaporize, you can swirl with the other element and then have your damage dealer do the other part, right? It has a lot of good potential. And I'm really excited for this constellation as well. These two are like the best constellations, funny enough. C3 and C5 are just level increases, so nothing too major. Obviously, DPS increases. Also, disclaimer, elemental skill from constellations roughly increase your damage by around 18%. People talk about it like it's nothing, but it's a DPS increase of 20% roughly, like 17 to 20%. It's a lot better than a lot of content creators will like to let you believe. It's not like you're missing that much. You are missing quite a big decent amount of damage. And now, wondering whales, like there's C12 just hitting a lot hard. It's because that's why, right? They're hitting an extra 20%. Yeah, so moving on to the C4, Ozara Genpo, which is basically just, it's just ER, a way to battery himself, so ER will be less important on him. So every 3 to 4 seconds, if you use elemental skill, you'll get a couple energy, and you'll get some gliding part. That gliding part's kind of useless, only matters in overworld, but the whole press and hold is actually going to be pretty solid as a value generator. For him. So ER will become a little bit less important, but it's still going to be pretty good to have. So don't forsake ER, but it will just allow him to spam burst a lot easier, right? And then skipping his C5, C3 and C5 specifically, Fushu Kitan and Bansei no Shu, like these are just levels again. It's 18%. And then for C6 we have Kesetsu Seki Haku. Ketsuseki Haku, sorry. Ketsuseki Haku. So basically, when he uses an elemental skill or burst, Kazuha will gain an Anemo fusion on his blade. So I guess C6 Bennett alert, I guess. Potentially. He will gain a damage bonus modifier increase for his damage, normal charging, charge attack, plunge attack, and the Ranran Haishin itself by 0.2%. And this could be roughly around, if you have like 800 elemental mastery, this is like, I don't know, like anywhere from like 200% potentially if you have 1,000. If you stack EM like crazy, like that's like the limit. It's like, it's good, but it's not like that good. So, especially if you already compound it with the Anemo damage bonus, that's the problem. There is a little bit of, people call it diminishing returns. Some people, economic majors will call it opportunity cost, like linear opportunity cost or whatever. But this will make him do like a lot more viable as like a mainline DPS carry. And so that's why he's more of a sub DPS, but this kind of like opens up a new path for him. And that's pretty much going to be it for his constellations. His constellations, again, I would recommend C1 or C2. Like C1 and C2, if you can afford it, if you're a Dolphin and really like Kazuha, these are really good constellations, especially for a sub DPS role. It just makes them like burst sub DPS, if that makes sense. And I mean, maybe I'm overhyping it, right? But I do think there's a lot of potential in this, and maybe a lot of YouTubers may come to the same understanding as I do. And we'll see how that goes. And then finally, for teammates, pretty much, I mean, I don't want to put teams down in particular. I think he's kind of like Venti or Sucrose. He's pretty much universal. You could pretty much put him in a lot of teams. So his CC and his absorption and his, especially with Elemental Mastery getting buffed in 1.6, I mean, he's going to be just as universal as those two, to be honest. He has a CC. He's going to be good, so people with CC are going to want to use him. He's going to have some good damage potential. He has Swirl. He works with any element for the most part. I would not put him with Xiao. I'd not put him with like Geo or Anemo main damage dealers in your party. But man, oh man, it's kind of going to be dealing good damage. I would still maybe pair up with Jean because Jean's kind of nutty. And with the 40%. If you have Whale Jean. I truly think, I know, I'm sorry, I'm not including like full teammates, but I just think he's just as universal as those characters, right? You almost auto-include in any team. He's so flexible as a spot because what he does is so universal. He gives free damage bonuses. He gives, like, literally, he gives a lot of damage. He sets up elemental reactions, right? He puts the CC on ground. It's just a lot of things that are just so good for any character, particularly, not just like specific archetypes. And so, you know, maybe you'll say Jack of all trades, master of none, but I say this guy is pretty freaking good a pretty good Jack then, because he seems to do a lot of things very well. And we'll obviously see when it comes out, and we'll see if my suspicions are confirmed, or maybe my expectations are different, you know, we'll see. And we'll see. But this is just my thoughts. So summary, like overall just going into Kazuha's kit, I think Kazuha is going to be a very solid burst, somewhat of a burst sub DPS character. He will have a little bit of support capabilities with his damage bonuses up to like 18%, but he is also capable of dealing a lot of damage as an Anemo character. And people are going to sleep on this character, one, because he's a dude and not a waifu. He ain't no booba character. And he seems kind of underwhelming at first, but when you take everything into consideration, especially if you get the new weapon on him and have C1 and C2, like a dolphin, I understand free-to-flow plays, he can be a good, really good character. And yeah, and that's going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, comment, or whatever on the video. It would really help me out with the algorithm. Also, I had my YouTube, Twitch frogs go inside my chat, so here you go. I do stream really regularly on my Twitch, which will be linked down below, twitch.tv/RazorNinjas. And yeah, this has been Razor, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.